It was a hot summer afternoon when I returned home after a long day at work, expecting nothing more than the quiet comfort of my own house. But as I approached the driveway, I noticed something odd. My front door was locked. I walked up to the door and tried to open it, but the key wouldn't turn. Confused, I stepped back and glanced around. That's when I saw her, the HOA president, Karen, standing near my front gate with a smug smile on her face. I hadn't seen her around in a while, and I wasn't in the mood for her games today. "What's going on here?" I called out, feeling a mix of frustration and curiosity rising in me. "Your house is in violation," Karen said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "I've issued a lockout notice. Your property's been deemed unfit according to HOA standards." "Unfit," I repeated, my voice rising in disbelief. "What are you talking about? I've lived here for years, and my house is perfectly fine." She looked at me with an air of superiority, her eyes twinkling as if she were savoring the moment. "There are several issues with your property that need immediate attention. You've received multiple warnings, but nothing has changed. The HOA board has made the decision. Consider this a formal lockout." I stood there, trying to process what she was saying. This couldn't be happening. No warning, no notice, just a sudden lockout. It felt like an overstep, even for her. But before I could respond, she added, "You have 48 hours to address the violations, or we'll be taking further action." "Violations? What violations?" I asked, my heart racing. "Well, for starters," she began, pulling out a sheet of paper from her clipboard, "your fence is a few inches over the property line, and your driveway, well, let's just say it's not in accordance with the latest HOA guidelines." I knew right away that this wasn't about a fence or driveway. Karen had always been a thorn in my side, always looking for ways to make life difficult for everyone in the neighborhood. But this was something else. I had been in this neighborhood for years, and no one had ever brought up these so-called violations before. I had followed all the HOA rules, paid my dues on time, and never caused any problems. But Karen's vendetta against me seemed to have reached a new level. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady despite the fury building inside me. "I'm just doing my job," Karen said, her smile widening. "And you should start doing yours, or there will be consequences." As if on cue, the sound of sirens echoed in the distance, and my stomach dropped. Was she really going this far? The HOA couldn't be involved in this, could they? I knew this would escalate quickly, and before long, the police arrived. But instead of feeling reassured, I felt more trapped than ever. The officer who stepped out of the squad car didn't even bother to introduce himself before Karen went into her spiel. "This house is a violation of multiple HOA codes. I need your help in enforcing the lockout. The homeowner has ignored multiple warnings, and we need to make sure she understands that these rules are non-negotiable." The officer nodded, but something didn't sit right with me. I could see that he was merely going through the motions, and there was no real threat in his actions. He didn't even try to go inside the house, just standing there, waiting for me to comply. I had to act fast. If I was going to win this, I needed more than just a strong will. I needed leverage. But as the officer and Karen stood there, I realized I had the ultimate trump card up my sleeve, one that neither of them would ever see coming. I stood frozen for a moment, staring at Karen and the officer, trying to come up with a plan. The air felt thick with tension, and Karen's smug expression only fueled the anger bubbling up inside me. I knew this wasn't just about a driveway or a fence. It was personal. Karen had always had it out for me, ever since I moved into this neighborhood. She'd always found something to complain about, whether it was the color of my flowers or the height of my hedges. But this was something far more drastic, and I wasn't about to let her get away with it. As I stood there, I felt a sudden surge of confidence. I had a secret, one that Karen and the officer couldn't possibly know about. My sister, whom Karen had no clue about, was the governor of the state. That's right, my sister, the one who had always stayed out of the limelight, who had never been involved in my neighborhood's petty squabbles. I kept it quiet, mostly out of respect for her privacy, but now it was time to use that card, the ultimate trump card, to stop this madness once and for all. I could almost hear Karen's thoughts as she looked at me. She probably thought I was just some powerless homeowner, someone she could push around without consequence. but she didn't know who she was messing with. I reached for my phone and sent a quick message to my sister, asking her to call me when she had a moment. Within minutes, my phone rang, and I stepped away from the group to answer it. I could hear my sister's calm voice on the other end of the line. "What's going on? I saw your message. I need your help," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Karen is at my house, locking me out for no reason, and she's threatening to get the police involved. I need you to intervene. She's abusing her position as HOA president, and it's going too far." There was a pause on the line, and I could feel the gears turning in her mind. "Don't worry, I'll take care of it. I'll have my office send a directive to the HOA board immediately. You don't have to deal with this anymore." I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief wash over me. My sister's influence was unmatched, and I knew that Karen wouldn't stand a chance once my sister got involved. As I ended the call, I returned to face the officer and Karen, who were still standing by the front gate. I could tell that Karen was growing impatient, her eyes narrowing as she waited for me to comply with her unreasonable demands. That was when I decided to turn the tables. I walked up to Karen and the officer, my phone still in hand, and with a calm but firm voice, I told them, "You might want to hold off on any further action. My sister is the governor, and I've already informed her about this little stunt you're pulling. She's instructed me to let you know that any further attempts to block me from my home will be met with legal consequences." The officer raised an eyebrow, clearly unsure of how to react. Karen's face went pale, and I could see the shock register on her face. She hadn't expected this. She had thought she was dealing with someone she could intimidate, someone without resources or influence. But now everything had changed. I wasn't aware of that," the officer stammered, looking at Karen as if waiting for her to take the lead. Karen, on the other hand, looked like she had just been slapped in the face. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Her carefully crafted facade of control was crumbling right before her eyes. The power dynamic had shifted, and there was nothing she could do about it. Before Karen could recover, my phone buzzed in my hand. I glanced at the screen to see a message from my sister's office. "Official directive has been sent to the HOA board. Any further harassment will result in immediate legal action." I held up my phone, showing the message to Karen and the officer. "I suggest you take a good look at that. My sister doesn't take kindly to people abusing their power, especially when it affects her family. You've made a huge mistake." Karen was completely stunned. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. She was trying to regain her composure, but the look of defeat was already creeping into her eyes. The officer, too, seemed unsure of what to do next. They had no idea what to say, no way to save face after their blunder. And then, just as I thought things might calm down, Karen did something that no one saw coming. She tried to salvage her position, saying something about how the HOA board would have the final say, but her voice was shaky, her confidence shattered. The situation was now out of her hands, and she knew it. At that moment, I realized that the power had shifted, and this wasn't going to be the end. In fact, it was just the beginning. The next few minutes felt like an eternity as Karen and the officer stood there, trying to regain some semblance of control. Karen was visibly rattled, her attempts at asserting authority falling flat in the face of my sister's involvement. The officer, though clearly uncomfortable with the situation, stood awkwardly by her side, unsure of how to handle the turn of events. It was as if the whole scenario had turned upside down in an instant, and neither of them knew how to react. Karen's usual confidence was gone, replaced by a palpable sense of unease. I, on the other hand, felt a quiet sense of satisfaction, knowing that I had the upper hand now. But the situation wasn't over yet. Karen wasn't the type to back down easily, and I knew she'd try to find a way to regain control. She quickly attempted to gather herself, her voice now filled with forced authority, as she tried to assert that the HOA had certain procedures and that I would still need to attend a meeting to resolve the matter. But it was clear that her words lacked the same force they once had. I didn't need to entertain her anymore. The power had already shifted. As I stood there, my phone buzzed again, this time with an email notification. It was from my sister's office, confirming that an official directive had been sent to the HOA board, ordering them to cease all actions against my property immediately. The email was clear. If they continued with any further harassment, they would face severe legal consequences. I showed the email to the officer, who looked even more uncomfortable now, but he didn't challenge it. Karen, however, wasn't ready to let go of her position just yet. She insisted that the HOA had its own way of handling things, and that my sister's involvement wouldn't change anything. That was when the real twist came. I had been planning to let the legal process take its course, but something Karen said struck a nerve. She mentioned something about how big names always thought they could get away with anything, how money and power could change everything. Her words were laced with bitterness, and it was in that moment that I realized her personal animosity towards me went far beyond just HOA rules. She was jealous, bitter about something deeper, something personal. Her power was slipping away, and in her mind, I was to blame for it. That was when I decided it was time to expose her for what she really was. No more hiding behind bureaucratic red tape. It was time for the community to see Karen for who she truly was. I reached for my phone and began recording the entire exchange. The officer looked at me with raised eyebrows but didn't say anything. It wasn't illegal to record public interactions, and I knew that if this was going to blow up, I needed evidence. Karen's face twisted with fury as she realized what I was doing, but I kept filming, knowing this would be crucial later. By the time the camera was rolling, Karen was visibly shaking with anger, trying to salvage her image by making empty threats about how she would report this and escalate the matter. But her words were falling on deaf ears. The more she spoke, the more her credibility crumbled. The officer, unsure of what to do, finally muttered that he was going to leave, clearly hoping to avoid further involvement. I watched him walk away, his presence no longer relevant. It was just Karen and me now, and she was losing the battle. I knew this wouldn't be the last time I saw her, but in that moment, I had won. The community would soon see this video, and Karen would have to answer for her actions, not just to me, but to everyone she had tried to control. The backlash would be swift, and there was no way she could hide behind her authority any longer. What I didn't know at the time, though, was that this video would go viral, spreading far beyond the neighborhood, and that it would lead to even more consequences for Karen than I could have imagined. As I stood there, watching Karen's defeated expression, I realized that this moment marked the beginning of something much bigger. Not only was I about to take down the tyrant who had been terrorizing my neighborhood, but I was about to expose a corrupt system for what it truly was. Karen's actions had set in motion a chain of events that no one, including her, could have anticipated. The twist wasn't just in how things had escalated. It was in how much the community was about to rally behind me. As the days passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something much bigger was unfolding than I had initially realized. The video I had recorded started gaining traction online, first shared by a few neighbors, then reposted by friends, and before I knew it, it was everywhere. The footage of Karen's meltdown, her attempts to control the situation, and her disregard for the law were spreading like wildfire. It didn't take long for people to start recognizing her for what she truly was, a petty, power-hungry individual who had used her position in the HOA to bully and intimidate anyone who didn't meet her standards. The video, with its raw, unfiltered portrayal of her arrogance, was a stark contrast to the polished persona she had carefully constructed. But it wasn't just the video that was making waves. The community's response was nothing short of overwhelming. At first, people were hesitant to get involved, afraid of retribution or being dragged into the mess. But as more neighbors saw the footage and realized that I wasn't just some person throwing a fit, but someone standing up against an unjust system, they began to speak out. Messages flooded in, text messages, emails, even handwritten letters from people who had been silently suffering under Karen's reign. Neighbors who had been too scared to confront her before now felt emboldened. They shared their stories with me, stories of unfair fines, baseless complaints, and Karen's relentless efforts to impose her will on them. They were fed up and they wanted change. As the story gained momentum, I started to notice Karen's behavior shifting. She had always been a loudmouth, quick to berate anyone who crossed her, but now she was hiding. Her usual walks through the neighborhood became rare, and when she did show her face, she kept her head down, avoiding eye contact with anyone. The community was no longer afraid of her. They saw her for who she truly was, and they were ready to take action. I knew I couldn't stop here. Karen's actions had caused enough harm, but the HOA itself was still a problem. It wasn't just about one person. It was about an entire system that allowed people like Karen to abuse their power. I decided to push further, contacting others who had been affected by the HOA's oppressive tactics. It wasn't long before I was connected with a group of people who were just as frustrated with the system as I was. We started to work together, sharing information, gathering evidence, and strategizing about how to dismantle the corrupt system Karen had helped to create. But as we moved forward with our plans, I couldn't help but wonder just how far Karen was willing to go to save her position. The video was already out there, and the public backlash was growing by the day, but would she give up without a fight? I had no doubt that she would try to find a way to turn things around, and it wasn't just her pride at stake anymore. It was her reputation, her power, and her control over the neighborhood. But she had underestimated the strength of the community and the power of social media. The truth had come out, and it was too late for her to cover it up. Things came to a head when Karen made one last desperate attempt to reclaim her position. She showed up at my door one evening, a last-ditch effort to regain some semblance of control. She was no longer the confident woman who had issued threats with a smile. Now, she was a woman backed into a corner, her face pale, her voice shaky. She tried to plead her case, telling me that she had only been doing her job, that she was just following orders, and that everything had been taken out of context. But it was clear that the tide had already turned. No one was buying her excuses anymore. I stood firm, knowing that this was the final showdown. Karen's desperate plea only seemed to seal her fate. The more she spoke, the more she dug herself into a hole. She tried to shift blame, to make it seem like she was the victim in all of this, but it was too late. The community had already made up its mind. My phone buzzed with more messages, this time from neighbors who had heard about her visit. They were watching, waiting, and they were ready to take action. The story had gone beyond just me. It had become a movement, a fight for justice, and it wasn't just about one woman anymore. It was about standing up against a corrupt system that had gone unchecked for too long. In the end, Karen's efforts to salvage her reputation were futile. The HOA board, now under immense pressure from the community and legal authorities, was forced to remove her from her position. The decision was swift and final, and Karen's once powerful position crumbled to dust. The damage to her reputation was irreparable, and she was left to deal with the fallout. But the real victory wasn't just her downfall. It was the collective strength of the community that had come together to demand change. We had taken on the system, and together, we had won. With Karen gone and the HOA board in disarray, the neighborhood slowly began to heal. People felt a sense of pride in knowing they had stood up for what was right, and for the first time in a long while, the air around here felt lighter. The neighborhood was no longer under the thumb of an authoritarian HOA president, and the future looked much brighter for everyone involved. What started as a personal battle had become a movement, a testament to the power of standing up against injustice, no matter how big or small. It wasn't just my victory, it was our victory. And as I stood there, looking out over the neighborhood, I realized that sometimes the biggest triumphs come when you least expect them, and that the power of one person can inspire an entire community to rise up.